Okay, learner, let's be honest. Sometimes personal finance advice, it's like, are you kidding me? Easy for you to say, right?
It can feel that way, yeah, like it's coming from another planet sometimes.
Right, like easy for you to say, Mr. Already Rich Guy, but Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it struck a chord with so many people.
Millions, yeah.
Because Kiyosaki, he's not afraid to say, hey, maybe that get a good job, work your way up thing, maybe that's not the whole story.
He really throws down a challenge right from the get-go with that whole two dads thing, you know?
Right. Two dads, and they think about money totally differently. And it really gets you thinking, who did I learn about money from? Like, were they giving me good advice or just repeating what they'd always heard?
That's what I love about it, that challenge to really examine those inherited beliefs about money, especially the ones that keep us stuck, you know,
Hmm.
running in place.
In the rat race.
Exactly. The rat race.
And who hasn't felt that squeeze at some point?
Ooh, tell me about it.
Work harder, get that raise, think you're getting ahead, and then bam, expenses go up, and you're right back where you started.
Back on the treadmill. And that's Kiyosaki's point, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're working for the money, but you're not getting truly ahead. And here's the kicker. He says sometimes even that safe advice, you know, get good grades, find a secure job.
The stuff everyone tells you is the right path.
Right. That can actually be part of what keeps you stuck.
Because it's all about income from a job instead of creating something that'll make money for you even when you're not working.
Exactly. And that leads us right to one of Kiyosaki's most well-known, and let's face it, sometimes controversial ideas, assets versus liabilities.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that.
I mean, how many times have we heard, your house is your biggest asset?
Right, that's what everyone says.
But Kiyosaki's like, hold on a minute.
Yeah, that's the part that stopped me in my tracks. I'm like, how can my house, the thing I'm putting all this money into, how is that not an asset?
Because Kiyosaki flips the script, right?
Yeah.
He says, an asset puts money in your pocket.
Okay.
A liability.
Uh-huh.
A liability takes money out. So that mortgage payment, property taxes, the endless repairs, it's all a drain, isn't it?
Okay, yeah, that's a really different way to look at it. So even if your house is paid off, it's still not really an asset in his view because of all those expenses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, he's not saying owning a home is bad. He just wants us to be honest about the cash flow, right?
Yeah.
And it all comes back to that idea of the rat race. It's about owning things that generate income without you having to trade more of your time for it.
So how do we get off this treadmill then? How do we break free from the rat race? Kiyosaki talks a lot about minding your own business, but I have a feeling he doesn't just mean starting a company, right?
Right. It's not as simple as quit your job tomorrow, although, hey, sometimes that is the right move. It's more about building those assets, the ones that work for you, even while you're sleeping.
Okay, so things like those rental properties we hear so much about, maybe investing in stocks, even building a business on the side. Those are all assets because they generate income instead of just draining it away like that house.
Exactly. You're getting it. And that's where things get really interesting, especially if you're not, a Wall Street whiz. Kiyosaki's not afraid to talk about how wealthy people use things like corporations.
To protect their money.
To protect it, yeah, and to grow it.
Yeah.
It's that whole thing, right? It's not what you earn, it's what you keep. But I'll admit, this part of the book, it always felt a little over my head.
Yeah, it gets a little technical.
Definitely. And that's where having some financial literacy is so important. Because Kiyosaki's point is that the system, the tax code, it's complicated, and the wealthy, they get that.
Yeah.
They use corporations strategically.
To reduce their taxes, you mean?
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like playing the game smarter, not just harder. But then he takes it even further with that whole inventing money thing. I mean, come on, that's some next level stuff.
It does sound kind of crazy, right? Like turning lead into gold. But what he's really talking about is financial intelligence, seeing those opportunities that most people miss. Like that example he gives, buying that house for 20 grand.
And selling it for how much? 60?
60,000. Just like that.
But he didn't just like take the money and run, did he? He did something interesting with it, right?
That's the key. He used the profits to buy more assets. He turned that initial $20,000 into something that could make even more money for him down the line. He created a system. That's the invention he's talking about.
So it's not magic, it's strategy.
That's it. But even with all the right strategies, Kiyosaki's clear that there can still be roadblocks, things that hold us back from really achieving what we want.
And those roadblocks, they can come from inside us, right? Our own fears and doubts.
Yeah. 100%. He calls them the big five: fear, cynicism, laziness.
Oh man, I'm feeling very seen right now.
And then there's bad habits and arrogance. Those 5 things, they can really trip us up, even when we have all the knowledge.
Yeah, those big five, he's really hit the nail on the head with those. I mean, who hasn't gotten in their own way because of at least one of those, right?
Right, and that's why Kiyosaki, he puts so much emphasis on self-awareness. It's that first step, You got to recognize those internal roadblocks before you can even start to break free.
Because if you don't know what's holding you back, how can you move forward, right?
But he doesn't just leave us hanging with those big 5, does he? There's something about learning, isn't there? Oh, absolutely. Learning never stops with Kiyosaki. Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
It's practically bursting with stories. His own experiences, learning from his rich dad, and then all those examples of other people who figured out how to escape the rat race. He's showing us that there are so many different ways to achieve financial freedom, so many paths you can take.
It's like he's saying, look, I'm not special. Anyone can do this. But you got to be willing to learn and keep learning, right?
Exactly. And speaking of learning, he does give us that really helpful to-do list at the end of the book, those action steps we can take. So for someone listening, someone who's like, okay, I'm ready to get started, what are some of the things Kiyosaki says we should focus on?
Yeah, what are the big ones?
Well, finding mentors, that's huge.
Right.
He's really big on surrounding yourself with people who are already where you want to be. They're like your own personal board of advisors,
Yeah.
right? Your own rich dads and rich moms guiding you along the way.
Instead of trying to figure it all out on your own, which can be tough.
Exactly. You can learn from their mistakes, shorten that learning curve. He also talks about mastering one investment strategy at a time. So instead of trying to do everything at once, just pick one thing and become an expert in that before you move on.
Don't get ahead of yourself. Right.
Right. Build that strong foundation one brick at a time.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But Kiyosaki, he doesn't stop at just the practical stuff.
Yeah.
He takes it a step further, doesn't he? It's not just about making money. It's about your purpose.
It is. He wants us to connect the dots between our financial goals and our passions. Like, what are we really passionate about? What kind of impact do we want to have on the world? And then how can we use our finances to support that bigger vision?
So it becomes less about how much money can I make and more about how can money help me live a more meaningful life.
Right. That's exactly it. It's a really powerful shift in perspective.
It really is. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but before we wrap things up, was there anything in Rich Dad, Poor Dad that really made you stop and think? A real aha moment?
The thing that really stuck with me was that observation about how the average person, they focus so much on income and expenses, but the wealthy, they're focused on assets and learning.
It seems like a small difference, but it changes everything, doesn't it?
Totally. Because when you shift your focus to assets, you're thinking about building long-term wealth, creating something that generates income even when you're not working.
Yeah.
And when you prioritize learning, you're constantly growing your financial intelligence, always looking for those opportunities.
Instead of just trying to keep your head above water, you're building a life of abundance and purpose. That's a pretty awesome message, I think.
I agree. It's empowering.
So there you have it, learner. We've unpacked some of the big ideas from Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now it's your turn to decide what resonates with you. What are you going to do with this information? How can you use it to create the financial future you've always dreamed of? This is just the beginning. Keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, never stop questioning.